Hello Year 12 and welcome to your next lesson on Spartan education. We're going to look at Spartan education from more than one source, but we're going to look at two very particular aspects of Spartan education, and we will need to do some comparison. So first thing to do, obviously title, date, aim, and then you've got a starter. According to Plutarch and Xenophon, I want you to just list how the Agoge prepared boys for what was coming next. So just pause the video, do make a quick list, and then we'll carry on. So the first issue we have to address is this issue of pederasty. This was not uncommon across ancient Greece. Ultimately, this is the erotic bonding between an adult male and a younger male. It was, like I said, it was very common across ancient Greece, and in many cases it was almost compulsory, it was obligatory. In a lot of cases this was seen as kind of a mentoring relationship and almost like a rite of passage. So obviously we now need to look at how this works in Sparta, given that we know that Sparta is quite different to a lot of other states in a lot of different ways. So as we said, we're looking at two different sources. So we need Plutarch 17 and Xenophon 2 from about paragraph 12. Draw a quick chart, and as we've done with previous things, just summarise what the two authors say about this particular practice. Particularly at the bottom we've got some key things to look for. So look at how each author describes this relationship. Look at what the purpose of this relationship seems to be. And then if you can, any comparison to the rest of Greece. Now this will largely be inferred, but the important thing as always is that you need to know what the two sources say about this particular practice, as you would with anything. Again, what I would do is highlight any similarities or underline any differences, just so you're clear how they match up. So pause the video, draw your chart, read the passages, and summarise the two views on pederasty. So hopefully you've picked up on this from the sources. In Sparta particularly, there are different dimensions to this practice. So one purpose particularly, it seems, is to promote this idea of military bonding. This again was very typical across the ancient world. If you look at groups like the Sacred Band of Thebans, they were a group of 150 male lovers who were almost monastic in their approach. They would not really speak or relate to anyone else. It's also seen as sort of an education, learning, like a mentoring practice, and it's also a means of widening the social network. So it's a way to introduce the boys in the Agoge to the wider social network of Sparta. And again, like we see, Sparta is no different to other Greek states in that this was a common practice, but they approach it with a kind of distant, very Spartan approach to this that hopefully you've picked up on. So the next unusual practice we need to look at is the practice of stealing, and this is really unusual for such an austere and harsh and rigid society such as Sparta, where you would think morality and self-control is so important. Stealing actually was encouraged massively. It was a key part of the Agoge, particularly stealing cheese. It's again almost one of these tests that boys have to pass. So you're going to need to go back to Xenophon 2. It's from about passage 6 onwards, and we've got a question here. What does Xenophon have to say about the practice of stealing? So he's quite brief, quite to the point, as Xenophon is. So all I want you to do now is just summarise Xenophon's view on stealing in Sparta. So pause the video, have a read, write your short answer. Now on to Plutarch. So Plutarch has a much more verbose and elaborate take on stealing, as you'd expect from Plutarch. So you're going to need to now find Plutarch, passages 18 and 19, but mostly 18. And there's a little clue on the video here as to what's going on. So read the two extracts, and then we've got these three questions to follow. So what I want you to do, rather than doing a chart, we'll do it slightly differently. If you want to do the chart, by all means go for it, but we just need to kind of make our approaches a little bit more flexible. So the first thing I want you to summarise is, what does Plutarch have to say about the practice of stealing? I do want you to include the examples he gives, because one of these examples particularly is really important for this second question. What does this tell us about the Spartan mindset? So what does Plutarch's writing in these two passages tell us about the Spartan attitude to things? And then last but not least, what are the similarities and differences to Xenophon's account? So this idea of working from multiple sources is really useful for the how useful questions, where if you know what it says in one and you can say it's similar or different to the other, you're obviously going to get pretty high AO3 marks. So pause the video and do this task, please. And then finally, hopefully you've picked up that this is a typically elaborate Plutarch story. So we've got to question this idea of reliability. If we're saying it's useful, is it really useful in telling us about the common practices, or does it tell us more? So the first thing we've got to ask is, and do write little short answers to these, do we believe the fox story? Is this believable? If we're going down the line of it seems a bit too far-fetched and a bit too elaborate, we've got to ask ourselves, why then do we think Plutarch included it, apart from it's a nice story that he's heard? And that will lead us finally to this third question. Does this story support the idea of the Spartan mirage? Could we consider this fox story just as a piece of Spartan propaganda to tell the rest of the Greek world just how dedicated and quite psychotic they are? So if you can answer those three short questions, if you can take a picture of your work and upload it back to the Google Classroom, that would be marvellous. And until next time, goodbye.